Good evening. My name is Lisa Steele. I'm with the Visual Studies program, and I'm the host of the Fall Proseminar series for our Masters of Visual Studies students. Welcome, all you outsiders. I hope you feel welcome here. I want to acknowledge the land that we are on is the land of the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee. It's the Treaty of the Dish with One Spoon that brought the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee together to look after, to care for the territory, and also to look after the resources that were here and the land. And we are very, very grateful for the being able to be on this land, and we thank the people who have gone before us. And there are many, acknowledging that there are many Indigenous peoples who are on this land now and continue to live on the land, as well as European settlers, which we are. So thanks to them. I'm going to introduce our speakers tonight, Wanda Nanibush and Rebecca Belmore. But before I do, I would like to ask the boss up. This is Charles Stankievech, is the program director of the Masters of Visual Studies program, he is has an announcement to make.
Hey, boss. How you doing? You're fired. No, I'm slightly prepared. I just wanted to quickly make a quick announcement because part of the evening and this happening here is a little bit out of conversation that Wanda and I had about a year ago when we were doing these After All journals, and particularly I have I think at least 4. I was going through my office before coming over tonight, and I think there's at least 4 issues that Wanda was involved in editing with the After All journal. And for those of you who don't know, After All is a journal that's published out of London with Central St. Martin's in partnership with the Daniels faculty, as well as MUCA in Antwerp and the CCA in Singapore. And Wanda's been very, very important in kind of reshaping and having them really rethink their editorial procedure and their content, including issue number 45, which features Rebecca Belmore in it, and 2 essays on her, including one from our alumnus Cheyenne Turin writing on her, and then an excellent conversation of Wanda with Walter Nomnolo talking about the concept and terminology of the decolonial. It's a very feisty debate, and I highly recommend reading it. So I just wanted to kind of use this moment for the content because of our guest tonight, very much intimately involved in this, to promo it. Also, I think it's at Type. They always support this, so if you want to get one, otherwise come up and talk to me. I have a few copies as well this evening with me. So I'll pass it off to our guests. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. You can't fire me. I outrank you. So watch your back. Rebecca Belmore is an Anishinaabe-kwe multidisciplinary artist from Upsala, Ontario, and a member of the Lac Seul First Nation. Belmore has been awarded 2 honorary PhDs, a Governor General's Award in the Visual Arts, and the Gershon Iskowitz Prize. She represented Canada in the 2005 Venice Bienale and was a featured artist in Documenta 2017. Wanda Nanibush is an Anishinaabe-kwe curator, image and word warrior, and a community organizer from Beausoleil First Nation. Currently, she is the inaugural curator of Indigenous art and co-head of the Indigenous Plus Canadian Art Department at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and is a graduate of the Masters of Visual Studies at the U of T in Curatorial Studies. Could I ask you to join me?
I think the mic's on. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Great.
You're so far from me, baby. What am I going to do? Hi. How are you this evening? Thanks for coming out in the snow. I guess we can introduce ourselves in our own ways first, and then we'll get into a conversation with each other. We've known each other for a long time, so we want to give you a bit of a window into how we work together and the show Facing the Monumental. So that's a bit what we will talk about tonight. I'm Wanda Nanibush. I'm an Anishinaabe-kwe from Beausoleil First Nation, Wolf Clan. I come from Nanibush, McHugh, and Meneg families, Anishinaabe on both sides, and a fierce mother who loved kids, so she had 17 of us, and I'm the baby. And so for that reason, I get to do what I want. So, welcome.
Thank you, Wanda. You are really such a baby. A spoiled one, I think. But my name is Rebecca Belmore, and I'm the artist. She's the curator. I come from, I was actually born in the town of Upsala, which is on the Trans-Canada Highway between Thunder Bay and Dryden. And it was like a community which was largely non-native, with maybe a couple hundred people. So I grew up with knowing everybody's business, so that's about it.
So you're nosy and old?
Yes. Okay, let's get to work.
Yes, we worked together for probably over 10 years, off and on doing projects. And I would say from my perspective, I started out in film and video and new media, and then moved into curating and gallery spaces, but had a deep love for performance art and for doing site-specific things. And that's really how I came to work with Rebecca in the first place. Was I just found her work to be one of the most profound in that regard across the country. So when we came to do this exhibition at the Art Gallery of Ontario, I really wanted to show, most people know, I would say, know your performance work more than other forms of your work. So I really wanted to show the breadth of your practice in terms of sculpture and media installation and a lot of the way you work with materials. And the AGO was kind of a perfect environment to do that in, because you've got these big spaces, you have like 35 people who are going to help you do things. So I just felt like it was a really good opportunity for us to show another, a large aspect of her practice that a lot of people don't know. And then I guess the other side of it is we were sitting down having a conversation about, we were making fun of Trump, basically, is how it started. And then we got in...
Making fun of what?
Trump.
Oh, Trump. Oh.
And then it got serious, too, about thinking about the kind of political movements that are happening around the globe that are pushing us in a very conservative direction and towards hate and these kinds of things, and really thinking about the role of art and artists in that, like what is the relevance of art today and what can it accomplish? And for me, Rebecca is one of those artists that tackles that very clearly in her work. So that's sort of where the idea for Facing the Monumental came from, the title of the show, the sort of impetus of the choice of work, and a lot of our conversations. And the title for the show also comes from a work that I curated Rebecca in 2012 in an exhibition called House of Wayward Spirits in Toronto, which had a number of different performance artists come together. And the piece she made was called Facing the Monumental. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about that piece, because it was also a structure for the show.
Yeah, the day that I made that work, it was July 1st, 2012. And so I chose to work in Queen's Park. And so when I visited the park, visited the site, I, of course, knew and checked out the monuments that are there in that space. And so I decided to make my own monument or anti-monument, however you want to see it.
Yeah.
We can talk about that. But there was a 150-year-old red oak tree that I used to make the work. And because it was Canada Day and Canada was how old? It wasn't 150 yet.
Yeah, I don't even pay attention
So the
to
tree
Canada's birthday.
is older than Canada, which I quite liked. And it's also a tree that is indigenous to this land here. So I thought that was a really good find in the park. And so what I did basically is I just took a roll of craft paper, I think 1,500 feet. I think that's what was in this roll. It was a lot. Anyways, and I had 3 helpers, 2 who basically rolled out the paper and dampened it with water to make it more malleable. And then Cherished Blood, who is an actor, she helped me wrap the tree. And so when we finished wrapping the tree and almost all the paper is gone, I placed her sitting on the tree, leaning against the tree, and then I wrap her also into the tree. And then she was wearing a long black wig, and she has short hair. So I took her wig off and turned it around and covered her face. So what's that about?
Yeah.
Wanda?
Well, you also asked for an audio of the we still don't know which one we used, the 13 gun or the 21. I think it was the 21 gun salute. And they do that in that park sometimes. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really matter about them. But we had set up these huge speakers in the park, and illegally. We didn't ask for permission to do any of this, which is a subtext to this House of Wayward Spirits idea. And there were guards at either end of the park because it was Canada Day, but they're so focused outward on all the festivities that are happening, they didn't even really know what we were doing in there, nor did they question it or ask anything. So all these tourists, all these people are going through, and it was really interesting because as you're wrapping the tree, it's like forming a gown. So she does kind of look like a queen, like some of the kind of Queen Victoria type. It has that gown-like thing that you were creating. A lot of people from anywhere got it right away about thinking about the earth, about trees, about, kind of honoring and all that kind of stuff. I had a long conversation with a guy from Thailand about what they're facing there, and so it was an interesting conversation starter. So really, really positive kind of feeling there. And then all of a sudden, no one's expecting it. I was expecting it. The gunshots ring out really loud through the trees, through the park. And I knew it was coming, and I just went, I just started bawling. And because you're seeing this woman in the tree, and this hair, and she's wrapped inside the tree, and it immediately made me start thinking about violence against women. And that kind of connection between the way we treat the mother, the way we treat the earth, and the way we treat women. I've always thought that earth-based philosophies are actually way better towards women. That's maybe not universal, and I haven't studied it, so don't quote me on it. But yeah, so there was that part, I think, that really kind of everybody just got really quiet and just communed in that.
Yeah, I guess my decision to take this kind of inexpensive craft paper, like this lowly paper, and wrap it around as high as we could on this magnificent, beautiful tree, and as a way of trying to think about the life of the tree, life of trees, and how our place in the destruction of trees. So it's like putting a skin of a dead tree or dead trees onto a living tree. That's kind of pretty simple how I came up with that idea.
Yeah, but very profound.
Thank you.
While we're on the trek of materials, there was 2 works that you see here, Tower and Tarpaulin, that both involve clay. together, we first brought clay into the museum in 2016 for Nuit Blanche. It was also part of Toronto Tributes and Tributaries, the kind of performance art series. Do you want to talk a bit about that, what that idea was to paint the entire Walker Court in clay?
Yeah, as a student when I was here at OCAD-U, or OCAD at the time, for 2 brief years. I would go to the AGO often, and at that time there was an exhibition called the European Iceberg, and what's his name? Lowther Baumgarten had a piece installed in the
Don't laugh at me.
in Walker Court, which had names written.
Yeah.
Do you know what they were? Do you remember?
Well, he wanted, it was called Monument to Indigenous Peoples of Ontario, or probably Native people back then, Native people of Ontario. And so it was like Ojibwe, but then he said like Yamasee, all these different nations that weren't even from Ontario, and actually many had been exterminated.
Like the neutrals, right?
Yeah.
So I was taken with that work when I was here at that time. And I would like to go and under that huge archway and stand under the name Ojibwe and hold my hands up for the people to see. So I kind of like the idea of being able to go and be in that space again, this time with a performance piece and the making of the work. And so I actually had to fight with the AGO to actually put wet raw clay onto the floor.
Which was stone.
Yeah. So the piece is called Clay on Stone. Because they were afraid of the clay staining the stone, which I found very absurd. So they came up with many suggestions on how to deal with it, like putting down plywood, dead trees, I don't know, onto a stone.
They were actually going to build like the floor again on top of the floor, like a replica of the floor.
So then they came up with this idea of putting a clear, like a film plastic that was matte. And so they did a little square, and I came in to check it out because they said, see, you can barely see it. So I tried to explain to them over and over that that's not the point. The point is to put the earth, the clay, to the stone. So I ripped up the plastic, crumpled it, and I gave it to someone, and I said, this is garbage, so why are we doing this? So then it was up to you then after that.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I was doing a similar thing upstairs. So I was telling somebody upstairs that if we couldn't just do it clay on stone, then we were just not going to do it. But it was the day before the performance. So at that point, everything's in motion, everything's been advertised. So it's like, it's a good ploy. It's a good ploy because at that point they have to go ahead.
Because it's all advertised.
So it's kind of a situation where you kind of have to push back and you can win in those moments. But regardless of all that, the beauty of the actual piece, it's a 12-hour durational piece, and part of the thinking was to do something quiet and meditative and durational when the whole city is going nuts. For any of you who've been out on Nuit Blanche, it's like, woo, pandemonium. So how do you kind of get people who are partying to kind of contemplate something or experience something? And it really, really astounded me how much over the hours you could smell clay everywhere, and the moisture in the air was intense, and it was like you had brought the outside in. And the way in which like museums kind of really try to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and so through the course of the 12 hours, the clay, because it was, spread maybe, a quarter inch to half inch thick, it started to dry and crack. So I like this idea of bringing this material, this natural material, which came in a powder form, like dried clay, and had to be mixed with water. And then you spread it out. I spread it out, and for me it was really surprising that it dried so quickly. So I was in my big painting, discovering things over that period of time.
Yeah.
Which was lovely. It felt really good.
Yeah, you can really get in touch with the material over that
And
12 hours.
Basically, I just painted a rectangle.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like a large painting.
So this is the Peace Tower. So when we decided to do this exhibition, it was important to give the opportunity to commission new work. And this is tarpaulin. And thinking about clay, again, like in terms of what's the next kind of phase. And you had gone back to Vancouver and had a certain experience there that kind of brought those two, the material and the city, together in your mind.
Yeah, because I spent 12 years in Vancouver and then left there to go to Winnipeg for a couple and then on to Montreal. So it was 5 years since we had lived in Vancouver. And so I went back. I have a sister there, so I visit. But when we went there to stay for the winter, last winter, I realized how quickly, neighborhoods were changing, how Vancouver is, kind of excessively building condos, poverty, poor people on the street, homeless people, the drug addiction, all of that, in my view, has increased. And so there's talk of, in the city that artists have to leave. They have to go somewhere else. So people, that's why I left too, trying to find a cheaper place in Winnipeg or trying to find a cheaper place in Montreal. And so I was just thinking about how, my choice of using shopping carts with clay is just to think about how real estate is really what it's all about in this time that we live in. And I think it's so impossible for people to think about owning anything. So I was just really seeing how they would dig these huge holes in the ground, and I just would see homeless people who are either collecting recyclables to make a little bit of money or pushing around whatever they owned or whatever they had collected. So I was really, overwhelmed by what I was seeing. So that's how I came up with these two pieces.
It was interesting in Tower that you've made a couple public art, or a recent public art piece that kind of structurally kind of relates in terms of the chair piece. Mm-hmm. This idea of like stacking things and building upwards. But another sort of connection between Tower and some of the work in the show, I liken it to, the world is the richer and richer we get, the more and more and more dispossession there is, like globally. And when you went to work with Documenta and you were thinking about what to do there, you had visited the island where the refugees have their tent city.
I actually went down to the pier, Piraeus Pier.
Yeah. If you could talk about how you sort of came to that project.
Maybe I should finish up with tarpaulin, which is the blanket. It's basically a cast of a moving blanket. So you see many of them in the institution of the museum.
Yeah.
They're a prized possession, and I think a blanket is also something that is necessary to live outside. So in Vancouver, I've seen people putting their blanket over the to let it hang out there, maybe dry up a bit while they go off and do something. And also you see a lot of tarps. So tarps are essential for survival outside in Vancouver. So at the same time, a tent is also a prized possession. And the tarp. So if you have a tarp and a tent and a blanket and a shopping cart, it's pretty good. So when I was in Athens and visiting the refugee camp with a bunch of other artists, a few other artists, and we were criticized by other artists. This one artist said that we were gawking, which it was a very uncomfortable experience. I mean, we took some supplies, and we were only there maybe 15 minutes. We didn't really feel comfortable, but we did go. And so that caused me to think much later, when I returned home, to think about the tent and what the tent has become. The tent is not just how I experienced it as a child, camping, fishing, being out on the land and enjoying ourselves and being close to nature, eating fish, drinking the water from the lake. So the tents that I saw in Athens were very, disturbing, and it's a very sad experience. So the tent that we actually worked with was a tent that we purchased at what would be the equivalent of Canadian Tire. Something inexpensive, not that great, but that's what we decided to do. And the we is my husband, Osvaldo Gero. And so the marble that was quarried comes from the same mountain range where the marble for the Parthenon was taken. And so I got to go after the fact, after it was brought out and it was already being shaped, but I got to go to the quarry, and I swear it was so impressive, like even more impressive than what has been built with it. It's interesting to see how, when it is extracted, how that looks, like these big cavernous, empty, huge spaces. So I was really, it was amazing to do this project and to think about all those realities, those places, the place where people come from. And then I was thinking about how the tent, if I could put it in this beautiful, on this beautiful hill, which is Philipapa Hill, across from the Acropolis, and set it so that it could face the Parthenon. And so when you get inside, through these little bushes, these low shrubs, you can see perfectly the Parthenon. So that was it was a huge project. I learned many things.
Yeah, you also take something that's hard, like marble, and did a lot of study of like drapery, like Greek drapery and things like that you see in the museums and elsewhere, and kind of it was carved minutely into something that looks like fabric, which is kind of a beautiful
and it was carved not by us from across the water there. It was carved by a foundry, a studio, actually, a carving studio. So
and
like
they mostly make people. Like funeral things, and they hadn't been doing like artistry for a long time, right? Yeah. So this is what we're talking about here. And you specifically chose to work with a Greek tradition.
Yes.
And thinking about artistry from there.
Absolutely.
When I had traveled to Athens to see the work, because I think it is important to see things in their situation, too, just so you understand how they change from place to place. But it's in this, what do you call that when you're, it's like a park, but not a park?
Oh, it's actually an archaeological protected site.
Yes, that's it. And you're climbing up like hills, and you're kind of, you don't know when you're going to see it. Like, there's no markers or anything. You're kind of traveling, and that experience actually sets you up well to come across it and still be surprised. And you come around, and it actually sits so humbly and blends in actually quite beautifully into the environment. It doesn't actually take over the space.
Yeah, you could almost miss it, actually, because everything is kind of the same color, you know.
Yeah, and I thought that was an interesting choice. And you did it on purpose. Why?
Well, the actual marble itself was a pale gray and with a fair bit of almost white. So it would look it would have stood out like a sore thumb. So we just had them patina it so that it would kind of look a similar color to the ancient, architectural bodies that are there.
Yeah, and then you sit inside, and the inside has this weird mausoleum-style spiritual kind of quality. It's cold, and you're staring at the seat of power. But from what I was thinking about is that seat of power still exists in a certain kind of way in the world, and we still kind of live with the legacy of the Acropolis in a kind of way. It kind of influenced a lot about my thinking about your work in the show. So that first room is talking about the relationship to capitalism and all these kinds of things. I couldn't help but think about it, and the movement of people and dispossession of people, but through through your work. The other work in that room was Thin Red Line, which is an older work from 2009. So you've been working through some of these ideas for a long time, and that one deals much more with war. Do you want to speak to how that one came about?
I don't I don't exactly remember, but I know that I didn't have much cash at the time. So I was invited to participate in a group exhibition at Catriona Jeffrey's gallery in Vancouver, which is a very respected space. And so I was at the time thinking, I think Obama had just kind of recently been put into power there. And I was thinking about being hopeful about changes globally and locally, and I guess I was thinking about war, and so I went to the Salvation Armies and the Value Villages.
That's the work there in the
to
corner.
Purchase business suits. So they're used. They cost me not very much. And then I went to purchase some sand from a place that sells sand and stones and landscaping kind of place. And I took apart the jackets because they have a lining and they have the surface, the top surface, to fill them with sand. And down the back on the spine, there's usually a seam. I sewed on each of them a thin red line of red thread. I like that, red thread. And I was just making them, basically transforming them into sandbags. And I was thinking about sandbags, how they're used in many different ways. So I piled them into a short kind of wall with their arms, with their necks, with them, all their heads facing in one direction, and the lining on the other side was, in my opinion, in my view, like the inside space or the protective side. So that's where you would crouch down and, face whatever you had to face. So it really is about war. And I was just thinking about, well, who fights the war and who makes the war? So that's why I chose to use suits.
And when you put all three work together, you get like the people who are living in damn towers are the ones making the war, and these are the bodies lying on the ground. Sorry. I think that there is something to grappling with these. We've reached a point in time where we can't even talk about capitalism anymore. We can't be critical of certain things and using certain kinds of words because people are tired. It's almost like we're fatigued with critique and resistance in a certain form, but at the same time we're at the moment when we need it the most. And so I find doing this show has really been good to find a way to think through these things, like through artistic practice, which is why we kind of work in the arts, because it's another language and it's another way of getting at this stuff. One thing I've noticed is that you often you're intrigued by events, moments, little pieces of writing, going somewhere, seeing something like you spent 15 minutes, but you found some way to create a marble tent that actually does encompass a very profound thing that the world is facing right now. I would say Pelican Falls is very similar in terms of finding that photograph and traveling up north. Take it away, babe.
So, let's go home to Pelican Falls.
Yeah.
So that work is, it grew out of a photograph that I came across while I was living in Montreal. I was listening to the radio probably, and I heard about this book. It was probably CBC, and they were talking about this book being, I forget what the title of the book is, but it's basically looking at the history of children in this country. And so a writer, Sherry Farrell-Racette, who is a scholar who works in Winnipeg at U of M.
Yeah,
she wrote this particular essay that was examining how Native children or Indian children, or now Indigenous children, were photographed back in the day.
Piece from one side.
So she was writing about, she was examining how photography has played its role in, I guess, having a weird or a peculiar vision of this idea of educating us as children. And of course, everybody knows about the residential schools and its place on this land, and how
many of you know about residential schools? Like, just raise your hands. I'm just curious.
Everybody, come on.
If you don't, it's okay to not raise your hand.
I just assume because it's
then you're going to go home and read a book, though, or do something.
Because of the TRC, and all this has been quite heavy and dense, in the last number of years. So, to get back to what I was trying to say about the piece, is that photograph, which was in the book that I heard them speak about. So then I found the book, found the picture, and I was looking at it, and it says it's at Pelican Falls. And Pelican Falls is right in my territory where my mother and my father grew up, where my grandparents and his grandparents, her parents and his parents, it's our territory. So Pelican Falls is a residential school that was situated at this rapids very strong rapids. And I realized that when I lived in Sulikout and in the mid-90s for a few years, I used to go fishing at that same place that's in the photograph. So the picture depicts 7 little young schoolboys, I would say 6 years old to maybe 10, and they're facing away from the camera, and they're all kind of crouched on this rock. And to me, they look like little otters, huddled together. They all have buzz cuts, and they're all wearing these coveralls, like a onesie, which is made out of denim. And so I managed to, through a friend, connect with the photographer, whose name is John McPhee. He lives in Parry Sound. The picture was taken in 1955, and we communicated through email. And he was like, at the time he was 95. So he said, I said, do you recall the day? And because it's actually, the black and white photograph is in the Ontario archives. He said, oh yeah, that was a Sunday in June in 1955. My friend and his wife, myself and my wife, we took the boat from Sulikout to Pelican Falls to go fishing. And he said these kids, it was on a Sunday, a really hot day, and so the kids were really curious to watch them fishing, which was really interesting. So for me, the fact that he was there taking photographs at this residential school was quite, I guess, a profound little moment for me. Because, of course, many of my relatives in my extended family would have attended that school. So.
Yeah, and it's like, how do you... There's a benign kind of thing that happens when people witness something and never ask questions. It's like he never asked, really, or thought about what these schools are, or who these boys are necessarily. Wouldn't have really investigated if it was a good situation there. In the history of residential schools, I think it's the thing that bothers me the most is that everybody keeps saying we didn't know, but if you look at the history, everybody knew. And so, I'm sorry, but that's just one thing I always think about when I, nice man and everything, but I just always think about what is our responsibility when we witness something.
The school was, and the site of it now has a high school, which is it's owned and operated by Indigenous communities, First Nations communities, north of its site. So I think, as a place, it has struggled with how to educate, or how we have access to education.
Yeah.
So.
I know, because everybody's spread out. It's
and so the interesting thing, there's together. 2 other photos. So in my communication with John McPhee, he said, I have 2 other pictures if you want to see them. So then he sent them to me, and it was quite a shock to see that, these boys had faces. So in those, they're watching the fishermen. So.
Is you had traveled up there with your sister and Scott Beniston, who's like cousin, who one a writer poet and the other a filmmaker, media artist as well. And you decided to make a media work, a denim piece. There's a quote from your sister.
Don't call it a denim piece.
A denim piece. A quote on the wall. Oh, get over it. A quote on the wall. And it's like there's a conversation there, it seems, between you guys when you were going and traveling together. Do you want to speak a bit about what that was like to go together, like not alone, but with 2 other people that you respect and really have a deep conversation with?
It was pretty simple. It was that we were going home. So we all live in Vancouver, Montreal, and I think I was living in Montreal at the time too. So I think it really was about being together. And even though we don't have a close kind of relationship with our reserve, our community, we do have ideas about it. And I think a lot of artists, Indigenous artists, really have some kind of relationship to this idea of home. So I think it's kind of something that's being discussed, I think, at this time. Like the idea of so many of us are in urban centers. Home is a very difficult thing to put your finger on.
To grapple with.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cheryl Arundel once said that Cree have a concept of that you take your home with you wherever you go, so it's always kind of there. I've always found that a little bit freeing. And I also think a lot about, I think it was John Burroughs was talking to one of his elders from his community, and he said, one of the fundamental things about us is that we move. We had freedom of movement, and I've been really grappling with that and trying to rethink, because reserves aren't ours necessarily. We never really built homes in that way. We had territories that we traveled through, and the reservation was very much a landlocked prison, much like when it began, much like the residential schools are. And I think about home a lot when I look at that piece, because I always think about the boy in the water, in the rapids, and is he headed home? Like, is he escaping? Is there, what's going on with him?
Well, it's actually interesting because, the story of these very young children being taken away, and to some, like at Pelican Falls, for example, you have to go like 20, 30 kilometers to hit the highway, the secondary highway. Your only other way out would be the water. So to put a school beside like a really strong rapids would never happen except with a residential school. So I think the danger that must have been there, and as a way of containing the children who might wish to run away, and many children did try to run away, and some lost their lives. So I don't know the stats on all that, and we don't know, but there was a lot of disease and all kinds of stuff happening. And so there's like mass graves and that kind of thing too.
Yes.
So, anyways,
and then
thinking about fishing and watching these two Caucasian men fishing, and with their wives,
because I'm sure they don't get to go out fishing. Yeah. So you chose denim not just because the boys are wearing it, but also because the girls would have made those. Those.
I think in some schools that might have happened, and other places,
a lot of schools they did.
They would have been mass ordered from somewhere.
Yeah. But the actual piece is one large piece that's been sewn together. What was the decision to not have to have a kind of ghostly body, without a face, without a?
I think if I put a face there, then it's someone in particular. So I think to not to have this, it's just the
It's interesting because it comes up with this piece too, because you chose not to have a body in there, right? It's
I guess I like using that so that people can place themselves in that space, become the body, see themselves instead of seeing someone else.
Yeah, you have much more of an empathetic relationship to it, but also it strikes me as haunting. It's like a sign that these things aren't done. They're still haunting us. They're still haunting society. There's still ghosts that need to be dealt with, legacies that need to be dealt with.
Well, I think the absent body. So if you think of like how those children were absent from their communities, from their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents.
So I had a dream about it being in the hall, like that kind of space, so that you could actually create rapids, because it's very narrow. And it was amazing to watch you, because she just sits down and she takes the material and starts going with her hands. It's almost like your body itself it understands the movement of the water and where a white cap might be, or it was just incredible to watch you actually create it in that way. Says a lot about your relationship to material in your body and how you kind of trust your instincts and movement through that. I placed it right next to when you come out and you have the other view of Pelican Falls from the front, so you see the boy from the front. There's Sister on the wall, which is the woman who's standing there like this, and she's up high and she's going to fly. Maybe we'll go into where Sister comes from first, and then I'll talk about that choice to put those two things near each other.
When we were coming up with this, deciding the placement of these two denim pieces.
I'll never say it again.
We made jokes that this is like the denim wing.
Yes, we had the snow room, the earth room, the water room, the denim wing. Yes.
So that work was made.
Here's the water room.
That was made during the Winter Olympics that took place in Vancouver in 2010. And so it was around, maybe January, I can't remember. But in the winter, we didn't have much winter, so that was a big problem. But I was to participate in a group show located on Hastings Street at Simon Fraser University Gallery during that time. And so I came up with this idea because it's located in the downtown east side, where Robert Picton did his killing. And I was thinking about how every February 14th, the women organize a march down Hastings. So I wanted to make a work that they would see on that day. So I made this work called Sister. And a lot of us, not everybody, we like to wear our denim. So
I gained too much weight. Denim doesn't look good on me anymore. It'll come back. Don't worry. When I do my self-care.
So it's like we make jokes amongst ourselves that it's like our uniform.
Yeah.
So I chose to dress the figure in a very everyday kind of pieces of clothing, jean jacket, hoodie. And I really wanted the women as they are marching, and they march, there's drumming, there's singing, there's protest, there's yelling. And what they do also is they have wheelbarrows, which they fill with smudge. So when you're there,
wow,
you can just smell it everywhere. It goes for blocks, and it fills the whole downtown east side. And it goes on for hours. They have a rally at Main and Hastings where they block off the streets. There's speakers. And one year when I was there, they had a drum group, in the intersection. There's smudge going on everywhere. And everybody's like, look, up. So this eagle came like swooping right down over us. And that was like, everybody's like freaked out.
Yeah.
It's a sign, like that kind of thing. Because, of course, our relationship to eagles is different from the U.S.'s relationship to eagles.
Yeah. Yes. Very much so.
Yeah.
We have a march here too, and we do it
big smudge.
Yeah, Allen Gardens is actually the site where they've been happening mostly. I was thinking a lot about those women these marches in honor of murdered and missing women in general, but largely, a large number of them are Indigenous women, and that the women that are living in the downtown east side, they're living with the legacy of residential schools. You know, a lot of the reasons that some of the pains and things that people are dealing with come directly from that. And I think about a community that colonization has really functioned through attacking women specifically and children, like as far as breaking Indigenous power, Indigenous connection to land, and our ability to fight, actually. And so I always think about those two pieces together in that sense, in the sense of, you know, that boy could be her grandfather, could be her father, or she could be the mother. You know, it's like this whole family relationship, and those kinds of things that people carry, and not to always like give honor to people, even in their darkest, horrible moments, you know, that there is a way that we can maintain people's dignity and we can give honor to them, no matter what state of they find themselves in.
I think it's interesting how, you know, we like denim, but if we see how it was used, that's really interesting.
Very disturbing. Yeah. Oh, we have some there. I need a time check because I didn't bring a clock up here.
It is 7:32.
What time is it?
7:30.
7:30. Okay. So we still have more time.
Okay.
That's good. We barely made it through 3 weeks.
Are you getting tired?
No, but I would love it if these lights could come down a little, if that's possible. Because I actually, I like looking at an audience and feeling your energy, and I can't see shit all. And it's also very hot. So it's hard to feel, you know, it's like this is an energistic relationship we have going on here. Oh, you can't.
Okay. That's okay.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. I can just deal with it. I will deal with it. Don't worry. We're very adaptable people. We've dealt with much worse than bright lights in this room. So, look at you beautiful folks. So you've done a number of works in relation to thinking about violence against Indigenous women, and some of them, you know, the fact that her back is to us. Yeah. Like there's a kind of refusal to objectify, and so you've used a number of different strategies, in my mind, to deal with that problem of placing, you know, it's like whenever people want to talk about, you know, something hard, they immediately want to show the face, or they want to show, you know, some baby crying, or, you know, those kinds of things. And art really finds strategies to resist that kind of thing. And I think maybe we should start with Vigil, because it's one of your performance pieces that got turned into a media art piece, Named and Unnamed, as one of the attempts to sort of deal with that at first.
Well, the year that Picton was
arrested,
later, a few months later, I believe, I had the opportunity to make a work outside of the Fire Hall Theater, which is located at Gore and Cordova. And so I just decided to think about what had just happened. So I made this piece, which is like a series of actions where I cleanse the space. So if you think there's a little back alley there, it's downtown east side. It stunk of urine, so I cleaned the space, a performance space. And then I had the first names of the missing women on on my arms. And so then I would just drag a dying rose through my teeth and yell the name into the space. And it was interesting because I probably yelled maybe 10 names, and then from far away, a couple of women started yelling back, "What?" So the people watching me did exactly what you did, as they started chuckling. So that caused me to realize that, well, I have to stop this. So I stopped the names. And then I put on this red dress and I nailed it to these telephone poles, a couple of telephone poles and some pieces of wood that were around, like little fencing boards, until, through nailing and using the weight of my body to free myself of this red dress, which was an amazingly strong piece of clothing. I found it at the Salvation Army, and it was like double polyester from the 70s, so it was like brutal. So that actually worked in my favor, and I think it's great, like when you're in the process of making a work, it's great to have, surprises that you have to deal with. And then after I was finished that, simultaneous to my doing this, I selected a young man from the audience and made a little shelter for him from these pieces of plywood. So I created a little space for him because the wind was gusting, and I had planned to light the candles myself, but I realized this will take forever. So I chose him, put him there. He kept lighting them throughout the whole space of the piece. And then after that, after I free myself of the dress, I get dressed and I lean against my sister's truck, which was parked right there. And it's Man's World by, what's his name?
James Brown.
Just testing her. James Brown.
I wasn't fast enough. Thanks, Kim.
James Brown played, and that was it. So, but I think it was quite a moment for me to go to that site, and there were still. It was kind of like a warm evening, so the light is still bright in the summer, and across the street there were prostitutes working, so it was pretty intense. Mm-hmm. But life went on, because in the downtown east side, because of all the drug addiction and craziness that goes on in the street, my performance really probably was not even close to reality. So that nobody paid attention to me. That the cops went by.
They were just like, whatever. Yeah. That's actually one of the problems with the downtown east side, is that the cops are like, whatever, all the time. Oh. There's a shot of the installation of that piece. You wanted to put light on light, like light bulbs. So when you take a performance work and then you want to create an installation from it, you didn't want to just, throw it up and have it as a video. You really wanted to kind of intervene on the image in a certain sense.
Yeah, I had an exhibition shortly thereafter, I think the next year, at
Morris
and Helen Belkin Gallery at UBC. And so I wanted to show that work, and it came to me that as I was looking at it, that I could create a screen that was embedded with light bulbs, so that when the video projector, which is light, hits the screen, that's two sources of light, and then there's a few moments in the video where you see me lighting candles, so that's fire, and then you see the young man throughout the whole piece lighting and relighting the candles. So I like this idea of how do you take something that was live so something that was fire, and make it interesting inside a gallery space. So that's how I came to this brilliant idea of putting light bulbs, because then it's like there's video light of the fire, moving, and then there's these static light bulbs which are attached to somewhere else, and then there's the memory, the video capture of what happened. So
it actually forces you to kind of look through something to see the video, so then you automatically get the sense that it's something that happened in the past or that it is a memory. And you have to do a bit of work too, right? Like you don't have the thing with what I was talking about in terms of dignity and honor and the way we talk about these things. That is one way to do it, is to actually not allow people complete access, so that they sort of have to do a bit of work, or to not say that this document is the final fact or the real thing.
Yeah, and I think when you see the audience that was there in the video too, and then the audience in the room is on this side. So you're looking through these bulbs and you're seeing other people who are watching me.
Yeah, it's always a really uncanny thing when you're staring at an audience staring at you in a gallery.
And even when the women yell back at me, the people usually in the gallery space watching the named and the unnamed laugh along with them. So I think that's really
strange.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, you can't. You can't control it all.
No, I think it's not about controlling it. I think it's about what I'm trying to say is that it brings I think the work into the space in some physical way with other people's bodies. Yeah.
We decided to put the names on the wall as well from one of the posters that you might have used. We think it's the right one, but you never know, that you might have used to think of the names. And Alain Cucci, who was the research assistant on this show with me, she realized that the cops, when they were doing the original arrests of when they did the original arrest, or when they were trying to find out more about murdered and missing women, like who are the women, and they were kind of doing this community drive, they refused to use the proper pronouns or the proper names for trans women or trans women. So they would only put on the poster their man name and things like that. Like you can feel the disrespect and the disregard in that, just even that choice. So Alain went and found their names that they had for themselves, and we used those names in the exhibition. It was really kind of an important thing to do that the police should have just frickin' done. I want to get into the idea of the artist as a worker, because you talk about this quite a bit, and there's a number of works in the show that deal with that, and it's something that I think is really important to think about. And maybe we can start with Mixed Blessing first, just thinking, because I think of it as a self-portrait, and I think you do too. So it's the one with, it was just up there, but with the hair and the hoodie.
Yeah.
You know the hair hoodie piece?
Yes. I was living in Vancouver at the time when I made that work, and at that time, Occupy was happening. So there was a camp down at the Vancouver Art Gallery grounds, their big back park. And so I went to visit with friends many times, and I don't know how I came up with the idea, but what happened is there was an Emily Carr big banner behind the camp, which I thought was really interesting. And so she's an artist.
Yeah.
Right? And then you have this
Is she?
this camp.
Kidding.
This camp. And there was a Indigenous component to it as well. There were elders, there were tents, there was like a group there to participate and be there.
Yeah.
So somehow I came up with this crazy idea to make this hoodie, which I just made it crudely to test it out.
Yeah.
And then I went down to the Occupy place, and my husband, Osvaldo, was taking pictures of me because I was holding my arms out like this so he could read it. So it says, fucking Indian across the arms, and then fucking artist down. So then I was standing looking at the Emily Carr, she's in the background. So just thinking about, the difficulty of, people struggling for things, and the artist also struggling to figure out what to do. And there was a man, an indigenous man, a native man, who was older than me, and he saw me, and he said, "What are you doing?" And he was chasing me around. And I just said, "I'm just making art." And he said, "Well, I'm an artist too." So it was really interesting.
Nice.
So that experience kind of, when I had this other opportunity to make a work for a particular group exhibition, which was organized by Nadia Mir, and it was called A Stake in the Ground. So I thought, well, what does that mean to me? So what's at stake for me is this idea of, this mixed blessing that I live with, that I work with and work from, is that, I am a fucking artist and I am a fucking Indian. So you deal with it, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so the figure is crouched with the hands open. Some people see it as begging. I don't. I see it as being open.
That person's nuts.
And offering.
There's a very bad curator who wrote that down.
But people, you can't control what they think.
I wrote them and said, "You can't think that." I was like, "It's racist."
No, that's true.
Sorry if you guys thought that when you saw it, but I'm guessing most people did. From most discussions I've had, people don't actually see that because the hands are so clearly, your head's down. They're not put out like this, There's no sort of gesture. If you follow the gestures of that body, it looks much more like an offering.
Well, and also in this original installation, because we had more space at Artmur, Montreal, the piece had its own little kind of long, narrow alcove, and I put it towards the end where you could still walk around it, but the hands are facing the white wall, which is the gallery. So that's, as an artist, this is where I work too,
Yeah.
This is my place. This is where I do my job. Mm-hmm. I do it out there too, but I do it also in here. Mm-hmm. So.
And those are your hands that are casted.
Yeah.
As well.
My little hands.
And what's the hoodie? The hoodie has certain kinds of connotations. When you were in Montreal or Winnipeg, you had different kinds of thoughts around the hoodie.
Well, I think it's just because of its, as a garment, it has its own read, depending on who's wearing it. Mm-hmm. So for, us, Indigenous people, I think it's just, it's comfortable, it's cool. But some people who don't see it as comfortable and cool, they might see it as threatening, or they might make associations that are judgmental and thinking that you might be a bad person or you might be
people get scared. They get scared at you.
Yeah.
It's or they think you're going to steal something, or.
So I think I like the hoodie for that capability that it has to make people feel in many different ways, depending on who's looking at it or who's wearing it.
Yeah, and the hair.
Yeah,
is looking a massive amount of hair that just keeps us. It's keeps growing and going.
For me, I've used hair on a bedspread. in photographs, smaller objects. I like using black hair, I guess, because I see it as being symbolic of us as Indigenous people. Yeah. And then the mass of it in that piece is really about having some power, and how hair is considered by us to be very
powerful,
sacred, I guess, I'd say, or it's used in many ways in ceremony. Yeah,
and you see all that hair before you see the shaved heads of the boys. And if you actually listen to people talking about their experiences in residential school, that's one of the first most painful parts of it, is because we believe that hair is sacred and that it actually holds our spirit. So it's only cut if somebody's died, or if you're grieving. And so you read these, you will read, or you can hear the accounts of people talking about how everyone's head's getting shaved, and they actually thought everybody had died back home, or their family had died, and the confusion around something like this, and also there's like a famous photograph of Big Bear when Big Bear gets arrested, and he was part of the Louis Riel Rebellion in 1885, and you see his hair being cut, and he cried so hard when they cut his hair. And it's a sign of power, it's a sign of strength, it's a sign of your spirit. So I also think about those things in that work. And I can feel, it's almost like the hair is like, it feels like it's gathering power from the land, from the ground, and coursing it up through this body. Time check. Just 8 minutes to 8. Were we supposed to let people ask questions? I was not clear about that. Do you want to, or would you like us just to finish ourselves?
Let's have a show of hands. Who wants questions?
I knew it. Okay, we'll do it, eh?
Sure.
We'll be generous.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, Louis, I want you to do it.
Give us 10 questions.
Yeah. I want you to do it, Louis.
I guess just to keep thinking about this sculpture, because it also has a thin red line, right? Like,
the beads,
face has one thread of the red beads, and of course I've connected to the suit piece.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering, and there's a red line, with this quilt piece. So I'm just trying. What you're thinking in that symbolism.
Well, I think I just see
also
it,
in fringe.
I see it as blood, like a line of blood or a bloodline, and so when it's coming from the top of the hoodie, under the hoodie, like from the mind, So and then in the thin red line, it's on everyone's spine, and all the jackets are different, but that's what makes them the same, and makes them into a mass, or makes them into what could be an army. So I think probably drawing a line of blood to symbolize various things.
Mm-hmm. Good
And
question,
then if you think
Louis.
of like a fountain, so when the blood hits the water, someone said to me, it looks like beads. So like every little.
Oh yeah.
If you go up close and stare at it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
You're literally throwing blood. Not literally. Actually, sorry. That's actually not true. She's throwing water that turns into blood. That turns into water. That turns into blood.
I wanted to know, so I've been learning a lot about the artworks, and which is great, but I wanted to know a bit more about the decision of not adding description labels about all the background of the artworks.
I get asked that a lot.
Cool.
But it's your fault, so no, I'm just kidding. No, we had a conversation. I mean, we did the catalog before we did the exhibition. and we had that conversation about text at that point, and made a really conscious decision to use texts that were somewhat personal or related to the work. Could have been poetry, could have been a fact, it could have been a news item, it could have been anything that you find in there. There's a really long story by her sister Florine in one, because really that's the artistic process, more so than when we, and something about turning her process back into didactic seemed contrary to what we were trying to say with the show, which is that things that aren't perfectly known or easily to digest or factual can have a political effect. So, and a transformative one, if you trust it, if you trust the unknown, if you trust your experience, if you know what I mean? And it seems more and more we need something like that. So it felt like if you put a bunch of didactic texts up, it kind of destroys what we're trying to achieve with the audience, because they're going to feel comfortable and safe as soon as you tell them what something means, right? And you need that discomfort a little bit to be there to really experience the work. And also, it changes the meaning of the text, actually, once you put like a big didactic there. But there were some, like with 1181, we made sure that you understood what that referred to, because otherwise you have probably no way in. Or like Thin Red Line, there was a bit of a didactic text with that. But the rest are all kind of more texts that kind of open up the work as opposed to close meaning down.
For example, I think when I make a performance, I do not like it. So this is a lesson here. I do not like it when people come up to me and try to ask me what it means, because we were there together as human beings. You're alive, I'm alive. I was doing something, you were watching, or you were not watching. And so I think that's how you cannot say exactly what a performance was exactly about, because it's not possible. Yeah.
One last question here.
Thank you for a great talk. Going back to what you shared about your experience working with the AGO for Nuit Blanche, with them and within the space, can you share a little bit more what it means to you to decolonize museum work and museum space as a curator and as an artist?
I would say that's not what I'm doing. That's an effect of my actions inside the museum. So I don't start out thinking about decolonization, actually. I start out thinking about artists, communities, emotional spaces. I start out thinking about a whole bunch of things, like a world of things. And then decolonization might be an effect, which is different, right? Some people come in with a program of decolonization and they know what it means and they blah, 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 and they do that. I don't have that. That's not how I operate. So I think that is different. I think about really concrete things like real estate. So I take political structures that we fight for in the street and back home, and I try to bring them, what's the equivalence inside the museum? So I'm actually not even concerned with the history of the museum so much, which is why you won't see me write about museums in a specific way. So I'm thinking, geez, they took all our land, well, I'm going to take most of this museum. Like, that's how I think. It's like, and expanding that space for Indigenous art at the AGO changes a whole shit ton of things. That simple act of taking space. So, and then we start thinking about what those things are and what we can do to expand that effect, I have too much to say about this, so go ahead.
I would just like to say that I came into the museum when the door had already been broken. Maybe it was swinging still, but I got in there. And I think, as an artist, I came, I had two years of art school, and I really learned how to be an artist, how to practice through the Artist Run Center. So, there were artists like Robert Houle, Joan Cardinal Schubert, Eddie Poitras, a slew of them that really worked to open the door.
And even older, before that, Daphne Ojig and Alex Janvier, those guys.
But at the same time, it's not to say that it's all, good and happy in there.
It's definitely not roses yet.
But Wanda's done a great job at the AGO.
It's not happy clay, happy clay dreams. No, fuck off. It's not about me, it's about you.
Don't swear.
I was like,
before you start to fight now.
Yeah, so just swear.
I want to thank two amazing women for this evening. Thank you for the exhibition. Thank you for the artwork. Thanks to all our guests for coming.
Thank you.
We have another Proseminar in 2 weeks on the 29th. Francis Loeffler from the Oakville Galleries. So
nice.
Thank you very much for this evening.
Yeah, thank you all for being here.